Welcome to the complete story of the Battle of Thermopylae, where heroes were forged, legends were born, and the very concept of Western freedom was defended with bronze, blood, and unbreakable will. This is the true story of courage against impossible odds, of sacrifice for freedom, and of how 3 days of brutal combat would echo through eternity. From the rise of the Persian Empire to the heroic final moments of the Spartan warriors, we'll uncover every detail of this epic confrontation that changed the course of history. In the scorching August heat of 480 BC, the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance at a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae. Here, 300 Spartan warriors, led by King Leonidas, would make their legendary last stand against the mightiest army the ancient world had ever seen. Chapter 1. The Rise of the Persian Empire and Greek City-States. In the ancient world, few events have captured the human imagination quite like the Battle of Thermopylae. This is the story of courage against overwhelming odds, of sacrifice for freedom, and of how a small band of warriors changed the course of Western civilization. To understand the magnitude of what happened in those fateful days of August 480 BC, we must first journey back through time to witness the rise of two vastly different civilizations whose collision would echo through eternity. Picture, if you will, the vast expanse of the ancient Near East in the 6th century BC. Across this landscape, stretching from the Indus River to the Mediterranean Sea, rose the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BC, represented a new kind of power. Unlike the city-states and kingdoms that had come before, this was a truly imperial civilization, one that sought to unite the known world under a single crown. Cyrus the Great was no ordinary conqueror. Born into the royal house of Anshan, he possessed a vision that extended far beyond mere territorial acquisition. When he overthrew his grandfather, Astyages of Media, in 550 BC, he did not simply destroy the existing order. Instead, he incorporated it, creating a system of governance that would become the template for imperial administration for centuries to come. The Persian Empire was built not just on military might, but on administrative genius, religious tolerance, and cultural synthesis. The empire's expansion was breathtaking in its scope and speed. After conquering Media, Cyrus turned his attention to Lydia, where he defeated the famously wealthy King Croesus in 546 BC. The phrase "rich as Croesus" entered human language because of the incredible wealth of this Anatolian kingdom, wealth that now flowed into Persian coffers. But Cyrus's greatest triumph came in 539 BC with the capture of Babylon, the ancient seat of Mesopotamian civilization. The conquest of Babylon was particularly significant because it demonstrated the Persian approach to empire. Rather than sacking the city and destroying its culture, Cyrus presented himself as a liberator. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, often called the first charter of human rights, proclaimed his policy of religious freedom and cultural preservation. He allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, earning him the title of Messiah in Hebrew scripture. This was the Persian way: conquer through might, but rule through tolerance and respect. Under Cyrus's successors, the empire continued to expand. Cambyses II conquered Egypt in 525 BC, adding the land of the pharaohs to the Persian realm. But it was under Darius III, who came to power in 522 BC, that the empire reached its administrative and territorial zenith. Darius was not just a conqueror, he was an organizer on a scale never before seen in human history. Darius divided his vast empire into 20 provinces, called satrapies, each governed by a satrap who was directly responsible to the great king. He built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway that connected Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia, complete with way stations and fresh horses for royal messengers. This communication network allowed news to travel across the empire in a matter of days rather than months. The famous Persian postal system inspired the motto later adopted by the United States Postal Service: "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." The Persian military was as sophisticated as its administration. At its core stood the 10,000 immortals, the elite guard of the great king. These warriors were called immortals because whenever one fell in battle, he was immediately replaced, maintaining the unit's strength at exactly 10,000 men. They were the finest soldiers in the Persian army, equipped with short spears, bows, daggers, and distinctive wicker shields. Their uniforms were adorned with gold, marking their elite status, and they served both as the king's personal bodyguard and as shock troops in major campaigns. The Persian army was a truly international force, drawing soldiers from across the empire's many peoples. Medes served alongside Persians, while Scythian horse archers fought next to Babylonian infantry. Egyptian marines served on Persian warships, and Phoenician sailors provided naval expertise. This diversity was both a strength and a weakness. It gave the Persians access to specialized military traditions from across the known world, but it also created challenges in command, communication, and unit cohesion. The Persian military system was based on decimal organization. Units were organized into groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This system, borrowed from the Medes, provided clear command structures and made it easier to manage large armies. Persian cavalry was particularly formidable, as the Persians had learned horse riding and archery from the nomadic peoples of Central Asia. Their mounted archers could strike quickly and withdraw before enemy infantry could respond. Persian religion also played a crucial role in imperial ideology. The Persians followed Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, which taught that the universe was engaged in a cosmic struggle between good and evil, light and darkness. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, was the supreme deity, while Angra Mainyu represented the forces of destruction. This dualistic worldview influenced Persian concepts of kingship and justice. The great king was seen as Ahura Mazda's representative on earth, responsible for maintaining order and fighting against the forces of chaos. This religious framework provided ideological justification for Persian expansion. From the Persian perspective, conquest was not merely about power or wealth. It was about bringing order to a chaotic world. When Persians conquered new territories, they were extending the realm of light and justice. This belief system would prove crucial in understanding Persian motivations during their invasions of Greece. Now let us turn our attention across the Aegean Sea to a very different world. While the Persians were building their vast empire, the Greeks were developing something entirely new in human political experience: the city-state, or polis. These small, independent communities scattered across the Greek mainland, islands, and colonial territories represented a radical departure from the monarchical systems that dominated the ancient world. The Greek polis was more than just a city with surrounding farmland. It was a community of citizens who participated directly in governance, military service, and religious life. The ideal polis was small enough that citizens could know one another personally and large enough to defend itself effectively. This balance between intimacy and security created a unique political environment that fostered innovation, competition, and individual excellence. Greek political development was profoundly influenced by geography. The mountainous terrain of Greece created natural barriers between communities, encouraging the development of independent city-states rather than unified kingdoms. The Mediterranean climate allowed for year-round political and military activity, while the extensive coastline and numerous islands encouraged maritime trade and cultural exchange. This geographic fragmentation meant that Greeks developed multiple political systems simultaneously, creating a laboratory of governmental experimentation. The most famous of these experiments took place in Athens. In the late 6th century BC, under the leadership of Cleisthenes, Athens developed the world's first democracy. This was not democracy as we understand it today. It was a direct democracy in which adult male citizens participated personally in governmental decisions. The Athenian Assembly met regularly on the Pnyx Hill, where citizens debated and voted on everything from military campaigns to public works projects. Athenian democracy was based on several key principles. First was isonomia, equality before the law, which meant that all citizens, regardless of wealth or birth, had equal political rights. Second was isegoria, equal right to speak in the assembly, which allowed any citizen to propose legislation or speak on any issue. Third was the rotation of offices, which prevented the concentration of power in the hands of a few individuals. Most government positions were filled by lot rather than election, based on the democratic theory that any citizen was capable of serving the state. The Athenian military system reflected democratic values. Unlike other Greek cities that relied heavily on aristocratic cavalry, Athens developed a strong hoplite army composed of middle-class citizens. These hoplites were heavily armed infantry soldiers who fought in close formation called a phalanx. The word hoplite comes from hoplon, the large round shield that was the warrior's primary defensive weapon. The hoplite phalanx represented a military revolution. Previous Greek warfare had been dominated by aristocratic champions who fought individual duels while their followers watched. The phalanx, by contrast, required disciplined cooperation. Hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields overlapping to create a wall of bronze. The front ranks held their spears forward, while rear ranks prepared to step into any gaps. Success depended not on individual heroics, but on group discipline and mutual support. This military system had profound social implications. Because hoplite equipment was expensive, but not impossibly so, it could be afforded by prosperous farmers and artisans as well as aristocrats. These middle-class warriors became the backbone of the democratic system. They were citizens who had enough wealth to arm themselves and enough stake in the community to fight for its defense. Sparta, Athens' greatest rival, developed a very different system. Where Athens emphasized individual freedom and democratic participation, Sparta created a militarized society focused entirely on warfare and discipline. The legendary Spartan military system was built around the agog, a brutal training program that began when boys were 7 years old and continued until they were 30. Spartan society was divided into 3 classes. At the top were the Spartiates, full citizens who had completed the agog and could participate in government. They were forbidden to engage in trade or manual labor, devoting themselves entirely to military training and political affairs. Below them were the Periousi, free inhabitants who handled commerce and crafts but could not participate in government. At the bottom were the Helots, state-owned serfs who worked the land and served the Spartiates. The Spartan system was designed to maintain control over the Helot population, which greatly outnumbered the Spartiates. The constant threat of Helot rebellion created a siege mentality that shaped every aspect of Chapter 1, the rise of the Persian Empire and Greek city-states. In the ancient world, few events have captured the human imagination quite like the Battle of Thermopylae. This is the story of courage against overwhelming odds, of sacrifice for freedom, and of how a small band of warriors changed the course of Western civilization. To understand the magnitude of what happened in those fateful days of August 480 BC, we must first journey back through time to witness the rise of two vastly different civilizations whose collision would echo through eternity. Picture, if you will, the vast expanse of the ancient Near East in the 6th century BC. Across this landscape, stretching from the Indus River to the Mediterranean Sea, rose the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BC, represented a new kind of power. Unlike the city-states and kingdoms that had come before, this was a truly imperial civilization, one that sought to unite the known world under a single crown. Cyrus the Great was no ordinary conqueror. Born into the royal house of Anshan, he possessed a vision that extended far beyond mere territorial acquisition. When he overthrew his grandfather, Astyages of Media, in 550 BC, he did not simply destroy the existing order. Instead, he incorporated it, creating a system of governance that would become the template for imperial administration for centuries to come. The Persian Empire was built not just on military might, but on administrative genius, religious tolerance, and cultural synthesis. The empire's expansion was breathtaking in its scope and speed. After conquering Media, Cyrus turned his attention to Lydia, where he defeated the famously wealthy King Croesus in 546 BC. The phrase "rich as Croesus" entered human language because of the incredible wealth of this Anatolian kingdom, wealth that now flowed into Persian coffers. But Cyrus's greatest triumph came in 539 BC with the capture of Babylon, the ancient seat of Mesopotamian civilization. The conquest of Babylon was particularly significant because it demonstrated the Persian approach to empire. Rather than sacking the city and destroying its culture, Cyrus presented himself as a liberator. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, often called the first charter of human rights, proclaimed his policy of religious freedom and cultural preservation. He allowed the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, earning him the title of Messiah in Hebrew scripture. This was the Persian way: conquer through might, but rule through tolerance and respect. Under Cyrus's successors, the empire continued to expand. Cambyses II conquered Egypt in 525 BC, adding the land of the pharaohs to the Persian realm. But it was under Darius III, who came to power in 522 BC, that the empire reached its administrative and territorial zenith. Darius was not just a conqueror, he was an organizer on a scale never before seen in human history. Darius divided his vast empire into 20 provinces, called satrapies, each governed by a satrap who was directly responsible to the great king. He built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway that connected Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia, complete with way stations and fresh horses for royal messengers. This communication network allowed news to travel across the empire in a matter of days rather than months. The famous Persian postal system inspired the motto later adopted by the United States Postal Service: "Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. The Persian military was as sophisticated as its administration. At its core stood the 10,000 immortals, the elite guard of the great king. These warriors were called immortals because whenever one fell in battle, he was immediately replaced, maintaining the unit's strength at exactly 10,000 men. They were the finest soldiers in the Persian army, equipped with short spears, bows, daggers, and distinctive wicker shields. Their uniforms were adorned with gold, marking their elite status, and they served both as the king's personal bodyguard and as shock troops in major campaigns. The Persian army was a truly international force, drawing soldiers from across the empire's many peoples. Medes served alongside Persians, while Scythian horse archers fought next to Babylonian infantry. Egyptian marines served on Persian warships, and Phoenician sailors provided naval expertise. This diversity was both a strength and a weakness. It gave the Persians access to specialized military traditions from across the known world, but it also created challenges in command, communication, and unit cohesion. The Persian military system was based on decimal organization. Units were organized into groups of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This system, borrowed from the Medes, provided clear command structures and made it easier to manage large armies. Persian cavalry was particularly formidable, as the Persians had learned horse riding and archery from the nomadic peoples of Central Asia. Their mounted archers could strike quickly and withdraw before enemy infantry could respond. Persian religion also played a crucial role in imperial ideology. The Persians followed Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, which taught that the universe was engaged in a cosmic struggle between good and evil, light and darkness. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, was the supreme deity, while Angra Mainyu represented the forces of destruction. This dualistic worldview influenced Persian concepts of kingship and justice. The great king was seen as Ahura Mazda's representative on earth, responsible for maintaining order and fighting against the forces of chaos. This religious framework provided ideological justification for Persian expansion. From the Persian perspective, conquest was not merely about power or wealth. It was about bringing order to a chaotic world. When Persians conquered new territories, they were extending the realm of light and justice. This belief system would prove crucial in understanding Persian motivations during their invasions of Greece. Now let us turn our attention across the Aegean Sea to a very different world. While the Persians were building their vast empire, the Greeks were developing something entirely new in human political experience: the city-state, or polis. These small, independent communities scattered across the Greek mainland, islands, and colonial territories represented a radical departure from the monarchical systems that dominated the ancient world. The Greek polis was more than just a city with surrounding farmland. It was a community of citizens who participated directly in governance, military service, and religious life. The ideal polis was small enough that citizens could know one another personally and large enough to defend itself effectively. This balance between intimacy and security created a unique political environment that fostered innovation, competition, and individual excellence. Greek political development was profoundly influenced by geography. The mountainous terrain of Greece created natural barriers between communities, encouraging the development of independent city-states rather than unified kingdoms. The Mediterranean climate allowed for year-round political and military activity, while the extensive coastline and numerous islands encouraged maritime trade and cultural exchange. This geographic fragmentation meant that Greeks developed multiple political systems simultaneously, creating a laboratory of governmental experimentation. The most famous of these experiments took place in Athens. In the late 6th century BC, under the leadership of Cleisthenes, Athens developed the world's first democracy. This was not democracy as we understand it today. It was a direct democracy in which adult male citizens participated personally in governmental decisions. The Athenian Assembly met regularly on the Pnyx Hill, where citizens debated and voted on everything from military campaigns to public works projects. Athenian democracy was based on several key principles. First was isonomia, equality before the law, which meant that all citizens, regardless of wealth or birth, had equal political rights. Second was isagoria, equal right to speak in the assembly, which allowed any citizen to propose legislation or speak on any issue. Third was the rotation of offices, which prevented the concentration of power in the hands of a few individuals. Most government positions were filled by lot rather than election, based on the democratic theory that any citizen was capable of serving the state. The Athenian military system reflected democratic values. Unlike other Greek cities that relied heavily on aristocratic cavalry, Athens developed a strong hoplite army composed of middle-class citizens. These hoplites were heavily armed infantry soldiers who fought in close formation called a phalanx. The word hoplite comes from hoplon, the large round shield that was the warrior's primary defensive weapon. The hoplite phalanx represented a military revolution. Previous Greek warfare had been dominated by aristocratic champions who fought individual duels while their followers watched. The phalanx, by contrast, required disciplined cooperation. Hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields overlapping to create a wall of bronze. The front ranks held their spears forward, while rear ranks prepared to step into any gaps. Success depended not on individual heroics, but on group discipline and mutual support. This military system had profound social implications. Because hoplite equipment was expensive, but not impossibly so, it could be afforded by prosperous farmers and artisans as well as aristocrats. These middle-class warriors became the backbone of the democratic system. They were citizens who had enough wealth to arm themselves and enough stake in the community to fight for its defense. Sparta, Athens' greatest rival, developed a very different system. Where Athens emphasized individual freedom and democratic participation, Sparta created a militarized society focused entirely on warfare and discipline. The legendary Spartan military system was built around the agog, a brutal training program that began when boys were 7 years old and continued until they were 30. Spartan society was divided into 3 classes. At the top were the Spartiates, full citizens who had completed the agog and could participate in government. They were forbidden to engage in trade or manual labor, devoting themselves entirely to military training and political affairs. Below them were the Periousi, free inhabitants who handled commerce and crafts but could not participate in government. At the bottom were the Helots, state-owned serfs who worked the land and served the Spartiates. The Spartan system was designed to maintain control over the Helot population, which greatly outnumbered the Spartiates. The constant threat of Helot rebellion created a siege mentality that shaped every aspect of Spartan society. Young Spartan men were required to participate in the Crypteia, a secret police force that terrorized the Helot population and eliminated potential leaders. Spartan military training was legendarily harsh. Boys entered the agog at age 7, living in communal barracks under the supervision of older students. They were deliberately underfed to encourage stealing, but were severely punished if caught, teaching them cunning and stealth. Physical training was constant and brutal, designed to create warriors who could endure any hardship. The famous story of the Spartan boy who allowed a fox to gnaw out his intestines rather than reveal that he had stolen it illustrates the extremes of Spartan discipline. The Spartan warrior was equipped differently from other Greek hoplites. His shield was larger and heavier, his spear longer, and his armor more extensive. But more importantly, his training was more intensive. While other Greeks trained for warfare as part of their civic duties, Spartans trained for nothing else. They were professional soldiers in an age of citizen warriors. Spartan society produced warriors of extraordinary skill and courage, but at a terrible cost. The rigid social system stifled innovation and creativity. The emphasis on military discipline over individual development created a society that was powerful but brittle. Sparta could field the finest warriors in Greece, but it struggled to adapt to changing circumstances or new challenges. Other Greek city-states developed their own unique characteristics. Corinth became a major commercial power, controlling trade routes between the Peloponnese and central Greece. Its wealth allowed it to maintain a strong navy and influence politics throughout the Greek world. Thebes developed sophisticated military tactics, particularly in cavalry warfare, that would later prove crucial in battles against both Spartans and Persians. The Greek colonial movement of the 8th and 7th centuries BC spread Greek culture throughout the Mediterranean. From Spain to the Black Sea, Greek colonies established new cities that maintained cultural and religious ties to their mother cities while developing their own political systems. These colonies served as laboratories for political experimentation and as sources of wealth and military manpower. Greek religion also differed fundamentally from Persian Zoroastrianism, where Persians worshipped a single supreme deity engaged in cosmic struggle. Greeks honored multiple gods who embodied different aspects of human experience. Zeus ruled the heavens, Poseidon controlled the seas, Athena governed wisdom and warfare, Apollo presided over music and prophecy. These gods were not distant cosmic forces, but personal beings who intervened directly in human affairs. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years at Olympia, exemplified Greek values. Athletes from all Greek cities competed in events that celebrated human physical achievement. The Games were both religious festivals honoring Zeus and competitions that allowed cities to display their excellence. Winners achieved fame throughout the Greek world, and their victories reflected glory on their home cities. Greek intellectual culture was equally distinctive. The Greeks developed philosophy, the systematic investigation of fundamental questions about reality, knowledge, and ethics. Early philosophers like Thales and Heraclitus challenged traditional mythological explanations of natural phenomena, seeking rational understanding of the world. This intellectual revolution would eventually produce figures like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, whose ideas continue to influence Western thought. The Greek concept of arete, often translated as excellence or virtue, was central to their worldview. Arete meant achieving one's full potential as a human being, whether in athletics, warfare, politics, or intellectual pursuits. This competitive drive for excellence created a culture of achievement that produced remarkable innovations in art, literature, politics, and military affairs. However, Greek political fragmentation also created chronic instability. City-states were constantly at war with one another, forming and breaking alliances as circumstances changed. The Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, faced off against the Delian League, dominated by Athens. These conflicts weakened individual cities and created opportunities for outside interference. The first major contact between Greeks and Persians came through the Ionian Revolt of 499–494 BC. The Greek cities of Asia Minor, which had been conquered by Cyrus the Great, rebelled against Persian rule with support from Athens and Eretria. The revolt began when Aristagoras of Miletus, faced with financial difficulties, convinced the Ionians to throw off Persian rule. The rebels achieved some initial successes, capturing Sardis and threatening Persian control of western Anatolia. Scythian mounted archers brought the tactical innovations of the steppes. Indian infantry, carrying bamboo bows that shot arrows nearly a yard long, represented the empire's furthest eastern territories. Assyrian and Babylonian troops recalled the ancient military traditions of Mesopotamia. The western satrapies were equally well represented. Lydians brought their wealth and their expertise in metallurgy, providing some of the finest weapons and armor in the army. Thracians contributed their fierce mountain warriors, known for their skill with javelins and their fearsome war cries. Egyptian marines served on Persian warships, their experience in naval warfare complementing Phoenician seamanship and ship construction. The Persian military system was based on decimal organization, inherited from the Medes. Soldiers were organized into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. This system provided clear command structures and made it easier to manage the massive army. Each unit had its own standards and officers, while supreme command remained firmly in Xerxes' hands. The Persian army's logistical needs were staggering. Ancient calculations suggested that such a force would consume thousands of tons of grain and fodder daily. Water requirements were equally enormous, leading to the famous claim that the Persian army drank rivers dry as it passed. Supply ships followed the coast, carrying additional provisions and equipment. Local communities along the route were required to provision the army, a burden so heavy that some cities allegedly bankrupted themselves attempting to provide suitable hospitality for the great king. The crossing of the Hellespont became a ceremony of imperial power. Xerxes personally led the crossing, beginning with religious sacrifices to ensure divine favor. Persian magi performed traditional ceremonies, while Greek prisoners were sacrificed to Poseidon, god of the sea. The king himself crossed on foot, demonstrating his determination to complete the conquest personally. Ancient sources describe the crossing taking 7 days and 7 nights as the vast army streamed from Asia into Europe. Once in Europe, the Persian advance became an awesome display of organized power. The army moved in multiple columns to avoid congestion and to spread the burden of supplying such a massive force. Engineering units cleared obstacles and improved roads. The Persian fleet sailed parallel to the army, providing naval support and carrying additional supplies. Local rulers came to offer submission, bringing earth and water as tokens of their allegiance to the great king. Meanwhile, in Greece, the approaching Persian storm created both panic and determination. The Greeks had received advance warning of Xerxes' preparations through their extensive intelligence networks. Merchants, diplomats, and exiles brought reports of the massive army being assembled. The scale of the Persian force was almost beyond Greek comprehension, but it also clarified the stakes involved. This would not be a limited campaign like Marathon. This was an invasion intended to crush Greek resistance forever. The Greek response revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of their political system. On one hand, the Persian threat forced traditional enemies to cooperate in unprecedented ways. Athens and Sparta, despite their profound differences, agreed to coordinate their resistance. Other cities faced agonizing choices between submission and resistance, knowing that defeat might mean slavery or death for their entire populations. The Congress of Corinth, convened in 481 BC, represented the high point of Greek unity. Representatives from 31 city-states agreed to form the Hellenic alliance against the Persian threat. They pledged to end internal conflicts for the duration of the war, to share intelligence and resources, and to coordinate military strategy under unified command. Most significantly, they agreed that Sparta, with its military reputation and strong army, would provide overall leadership of the Allied forces. However, Greek unity was far from complete. Many cities chose to submit to Xerxes rather than risk destruction. The island of Aegina, despite its naval power, initially favored accommodation with Persia. Thebes, one of the most powerful cities in central Greece, would eventually join the Persian side. Even among the allies, disagreements emerged over strategy, resource allocation, and command authority. The Athenian response to the Persian threat demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of democratic decision-making in crisis. The Athenian assembly engaged in intense debates over the proper strategy. Some favored attempting to defend Attica at its borders, while others argued for withdrawal behind the walls of Athens. The most radical proposal came from Themistocles, who argued that Athens's future lay on the sea, not on land. This military system had profound social implications. Because hoplite equipment was expensive, but not impossibly so, it could be afforded by prosperous farmers and artisans as well as aristocrats. These middle-class warriors became the backbone of the democratic system. They were citizens who had enough wealth to arm themselves and enough stake in the community to fight for its defense. Sparta, Athens's greatest rival, developed a very different system. Where Athens emphasized individual freedom and democratic participation, Sparta created a militarized society focused entirely on warfare and discipline. The legendary Spartan military system was built around the agog, a brutal training program that began when boys were 7 years old and continued until they were 30. Spartan society was divided into 3 classes. At the top were the Spartiates, full citizens who had completed the agog and could participate in government. They were forbidden to engage in trade or manual labor, devoting themselves entirely to military training and political affairs. Below them were the Periousi, free inhabitants who handled commerce and crafts but could not participate in government. At the bottom were the Helots, state-owned serfs who worked the land and served the Spartiates. The Spartan system was designed to maintain control over the Helot population, which greatly outnumbered the Spartiates. The constant threat of Helot rebellion created a siege mentality that shaped every aspect of Spartan society. Young Spartan men were required to participate in the Crypteia, a secret police force that terrorized the Helot population and eliminated potential leaders. Spartan military training was legendarily harsh. Boys entered the agog at age 7, living in communal barracks under the supervision of older students. They were deliberately underfed to encourage stealing, but were severely punished if caught, teaching them cunning and stealth. Physical training was constant and brutal, designed to create warriors who could endure any hardship. The famous story of the Spartan boy who allowed a fox to gnaw out his intestines rather than reveal that he had stolen it illustrates the extremes of Spartan discipline. The Spartan warrior was equipped differently from other Greek hoplites. His shield was larger and heavier, his spear longer, and his armor more extensive. But more importantly, his training was more intensive. While other Greeks trained for warfare as part of their civic duties, Spartans trained for nothing else. They were professional soldiers in an age of citizen warriors. Spartan society produced warriors of extraordinary skill and courage, but at a terrible cost. The rigid social system stifled innovation and creativity. The emphasis on military discipline over individual development created a society that was powerful but brittle. Sparta could field the finest warriors in Greece, but it struggled to adapt to changing circumstances or new challenges. Other Greek city-states developed their own unique characteristics. Corinth became a major commercial power, controlling trade routes between the Peloponnese and central Greece. Its wealth allowed it to maintain a strong navy and influence politics throughout the Greek world. Thebes developed sophisticated military tactics, particularly in cavalry warfare, that would later prove crucial in battles against both Spartans and Persians. The Greek colonial movement of the 8th and 7th centuries BC spread Greek culture throughout the Mediterranean. From Spain to the Black Sea, Greek colonies established new cities that maintained cultural and religious ties to their mother cities while developing their own political systems. These colonies served as laboratories for political experimentation and as sources of wealth and military manpower. Greek religion also differed fundamentally from Persian Zoroastrianism, where Persians worshipped a single supreme deity engaged in cosmic struggle. Greeks honored multiple gods who embodied different aspects of human experience. Zeus ruled the heavens, Poseidon controlled the seas, Athena governed wisdom and warfare, Apollo presided over music and prophecy. These gods were not distant cosmic forces, but personal beings who intervened directly in human affairs. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years at Olympia, exemplified Greek values. Athletes from all Greek cities competed in events that celebrated human physical achievement. The Games were both religious festivals honoring Zeus and competitions that allowed cities to display their excellence. Winners achieved fame throughout the Greek world, and their victories reflected glory on their home cities. Greek intellectual culture was equally distinctive. The Greeks developed philosophy, the systematic investigation of fundamental questions about reality, knowledge, and ethics. Early philosophers like Thales and Heraclitus challenged traditional mythological explanations of natural phenomena, seeking rational understanding of the world. This intellectual revolution would eventually produce figures like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, whose ideas continue to influence Western thought. The Greek concept of arete, often translated as excellence or virtue, was central to their worldview. Arete meant achieving one's full potential as a human being, whether in athletics, warfare, politics, or intellectual pursuits. This competitive drive for excellence created a culture of achievement that produced remarkable innovations in art, literature, politics, and military affairs. However, Greek political fragmentation also created chronic instability. City-states were constantly at war with one another, forming and breaking alliances as circumstances changed. The Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, faced off against the Delian League, dominated by Athens. These conflicts weakened individual cities and created opportunities for outside interference. The first major contact between Greeks and Persians came through the Ionian Revolt of 499–494 BC. The Greek cities of Asia Minor, which had been conquered by Cyrus the Great, rebelled against Persian rule with support from Athens and Eretria. The revolt began when Aristagoras of Miletus, faced with financial difficulties, convinced the Ionians to throw off Persian rule. The rebels achieved some initial successes, capturing Sardis and threatening Persian control of western Anatolia. However, the Persian response was swift and effective. Darius mobilized the full resources of his empire, bringing armies from across his domains to crush the rebellion. The decisive battle came at Lade in 494 BC, where the Persian fleet, augmented by Phoenician and Egyptian ships, destroyed the Ionian navy. The revolt collapsed, and the participating cities were severely punished. Darius was particularly angered by Athenian and Eretrian support for the rebels. From the Persian perspective, these were insignificant city-states that had dared to interfere in the internal affairs of the great king. Such defiance could not be tolerated, as it might encourage other subjects to rebel. Darius began planning a punitive expedition to bring these upstart Greeks under Persian control. The first Persian expedition, launched in 492 BC under Mardonius, met with disaster when the fleet was wrecked in a storm off Mount Athos. Undeterred, Darius organized a second expedition in 490 BC, this time taking a direct route across the Aegean Sea. The Persian force was commanded by Artaphernes and Datis and included cavalry as well as infantry. The Persians first captured Eretria after a brief siege, enslaving its population and burning its temples in revenge for supporting the Ionian revolt. They then sailed to Marathon, a plain on the northeast coast of Attica where their cavalry could operate effectively. The choice of landing site demonstrated Persian strategic thinking. Marathon was close enough to Athens to threaten the city, but far enough away to allow the Persian army to deploy properly. The Battle of Marathon on September 12, 490 BC, proved to be one of the most important engagements in ancient history. The Athenians, led by the general Miltiades, faced a Persian army that significantly outnumbered them. However, Miltiades devised a brilliant tactical plan that exploited the weaknesses in Persian deployment. The Athenians strengthened their flanks while thinning their center, creating a formation that could envelop the Persian army. When the battle began, the Persian center initially pushed back the Greek line, but the strengthened Greek wings broke through the Persian flanks and surrounded the enemy center. The result was a crushing defeat for the Persians, who lost over 6,000 men, while Greek casualties numbered only 192. Marathon demonstrated that Persian armies were not invincible. The victory showed that disciplined Greek hoplites in proper formation could defeat even elite Persian troops. The psychological impact was enormous, giving Greeks confidence that they could resist Persian expansion. The famous run of Pheidippides from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory became the inspiration for the modern marathon race. However, the Athenians knew that Darius would not accept this defeat. The great king had the resources of an entire empire at his disposal, while Athens was just one small city-state. The question was not whether the Persians would return, but when and in what force. Greek leaders began preparing for a larger conflict that would determine whether Greek independence could survive Persian imperial ambitions. Darius spent the next several years planning a much larger expedition. He ordered the construction of a massive fleet and began assembling armies from across his empire. However, his death in 486 BC delayed these plans. His son Xerxes inherited both the throne and the determination to complete his father's work of conquering Greece. Xerxes was even more committed to the Greek expedition than his father had been. He saw it not just as a matter of revenge for Marathon, but as essential to Persian imperial prestige. If small Greek city-states could successfully defy the great king, other subjects might be encouraged to rebel. The conquest of Greece would demonstrate that Persian power was truly universal and irresistible. The preparations Xerxes undertook were unprecedented in scale. Ancient sources describe armies numbering in the millions, though modern historians believe these figures are exaggerated. Even allowing for ancient hyperbole, the force Xerxes assembled was enormous by ancient standards. He drew soldiers from every corner of his empire, creating a truly international army that reflected the diversity of Persian rule. The logistical challenges of such an expedition were staggering. Feeding and supplying millions of men required careful planning and enormous resources. Xerxes ordered the construction of supply depots along the route from Asia to Greece. He commissioned the digging of a canal through the Athos Peninsula to avoid the naval disaster that had befallen Mardonius. Most famously, he ordered the construction of pontoon bridges across the Hellespont to allow his army to march from Asia into Europe. The bridge construction became legendary in ancient literature. When the first bridges were destroyed by storms, Xerxes ordered the sea to be whipped and branded for its disobedience, a gesture that Greeks saw as evidence of Persian hubris. New bridges were built with greater care, creating a causeway wide enough for the entire army to cross. The bridges were marvels of ancient engineering, demonstrating Persian technical capabilities and imperial resources. Greek preparations were less extensive, but more unified than might have been expected. The threat of Persian conquest forced traditional enemies to cooperate. Athens and Sparta, despite their rivalry, agreed to coordinate their resistance. Other cities faced difficult choices between submission and resistance, knowing that defeat would mean slavery or death. The stage was thus set for a confrontation that would determine the future of Greek civilization. On one side stood the mighty Persian Empire, with resources drawn from 3 continents and armies that had conquered most of the known world. On the other stood the fractious Greek city-states, united only by their determination to remain free and their belief that their way of life was worth any sacrifice. As Xerxes' vast host began its march from Sardis toward the Hellespont in the spring of 480 BC, both sides understood that they were embarking on more than a military campaign. This was a clash between 2 fundamentally different visions of human society: the Persian ideal of universal empire under a divine king, and the Greek commitment to local autonomy and citizen participation in government. The Persian army represented the culmination of 2 centuries of imperial expansion. It included the finest warriors from dozens of nations, equipped with the best weapons and armor their respective cultures could provide. The Immortals formed its elite core, but they were supported by Median cavalry, Scythian archers, Indian infantry, and naval forces from Phoenicia and Egypt. The Greek forces were smaller and less professionally equipped, but they were fighting for their homes and their freedom. They understood that defeat meant not just political subjugation, but cultural extinction. Persian rule would bring prosperity and peace, but at the cost of the political independence and cultural creativity that defined Greek civilization. As these 2 mighty forces prepared to meet, the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance. The outcome would determine whether the future would belong to the imperial unity of the East or the competitive individualism of the West. The narrow pass of Thermopylae would become the stage for one of history's most famous confrontations, where a small band of Greeks would make a stand that would echo through the ages. Chapter 3. The battle begins. 3 days of combat. In the scorching heat of August 480 BC, 2 vastly different armies converged on the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae. The name itself, meaning hot gates, derived from the sulfurous springs that bubbled up from the earth nearby, creating an otherworldly atmosphere of mist and mineral-laden vapors. This geological phenomenon seemed fitting for a place about to witness one of history's most legendary confrontations, where the fate of Western civilization would be decided by the clash of bronze against bronze, spear against spear, and will against will. The Persian host that approached Thermopylae from the north defied easy description. Ancient sources struggled to convey its magnitude, resorting to fantastic numbers that stretched credibility. Even allowing for exaggeration, this was undoubtedly the largest military force ever assembled in the ancient world. The army stretched for miles along the coastal road, its various contingents creating a living tapestry of the Persian Empire's diversity and power. At the head of this mighty procession rode Xerxes himself, the King of Kings, ruler of an empire that encompassed 3 continents. His royal chariot was surrounded by the 10,000 immortals, their golden armor glinting in the Mediterranean sun, their spear points creating a forest of bronze and iron. Behind them marched contingents from every corner of the known world. Median cavalry with their distinctive caps and scaled armor, Scythian horse archers from the steppes, Indian infantry carrying bamboo bows taller than themselves, Assyrian spearmen in their traditional leather and bronze, Egyptian marines trained in naval combat. The sight of this approaching multitude must have been both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The ground trembled under countless feet, the air filled with dust clouds that could be seen from miles away. The cacophony of languages, the clash of equipment, the neighing of thousands of horses, and the creaking of supply wagons created a symphony of imperial power that announced Persian arrival long before the army itself came into view. Xerxes had taken nearly 4 years to assemble this force, drawing upon the vast resources of an empire that stretched from India to Egypt, from the Caucasus to the Arabian desert. Every satrapy had contributed its finest warriors, its most skilled craftsmen, its greatest treasures to this supreme effort. The Persian king understood that this campaign was not merely about conquering a few Greek city-states. It was about demonstrating that Persian power was truly universal, and that resistance to the great king was not only futile, but impious. The Persian military system that produced this magnificent army was the result of 2 centuries of evolution and refinement. Beginning with Cyrus the Great's innovations in combined arms tactics, continuing through Darius's administrative reforms, and culminating in Xerxes' massive mobilization, the Persian military had become the most sophisticated fighting force of its time. It combined the cavalry traditions of the Iranian plateau with the infantry techniques of Mesopotamia, the naval skills of Phoenicia with the archery expertise of the steppes. The core of Persian military doctrine was flexibility and coordination. Unlike Greek armies that relied primarily on heavy infantry, Persian forces integrated cavalry, infantry, and archers in mutually supporting formations. Persian commanders could adapt their tactics to different terrain and enemies, switching between concentrated assaults and dispersed harassment as circumstances required. This tactical flexibility had enabled Persian armies to defeat enemies as diverse as Lydian cavalry, Babylonian infantry, Egyptian chariots, and Scythian horse archers. The Persian approach to warfare also emphasized psychological impact. The magnificent uniforms, the elaborate ceremonies, the sheer size of their armies were all designed to intimidate enemies into submission without fighting. Most Persian campaigns began with diplomatic missions, offering generous terms for surrender, combined with demonstrations of overwhelming force designed to make resistance seem hopeless. This approach had proven remarkably successful throughout the empire's expansion, as most enemies chose submission over annihilation. As this awesome force approached Thermopylae, the contrast with the defending Greek army could not have been more stark. Where the Persians numbered in the hundreds of thousands, the Greeks could muster fewer than 7,000 men. Where Persian contingents came from across the known world, the Greek defenders represented only a handful of city-states from a small peninsula. Where Persian equipment displayed the wealth of an empire, Greek gear showed the practical efficiency of citizen soldiers. Yet these apparent disadvantages masked significant Greek strengths that would soon become evident in battle. The Greek force, though small, was composed entirely of hoplites, heavily armed infantry soldiers who had trained extensively in formation fighting. Every Greek warrior at Thermopylae was a citizen of his city-state, fighting not for pay or conquest, but for his home, his family, and his freedom. This motivation created a level of commitment that professional soldiers, however skilled, rarely matched. The Greek position at Thermopylae had been chosen with careful attention to tactical advantages. The pass was so narrow that Persian numbers would be largely negated, forcing them to attack on a front narrow enough for Greek hoplites to defend effectively. The steep cliffs on the inland side prevented flanking movements, while the sea on the coastal side was controlled by the Greek fleet at nearby Artemisium. The Phocians had built a wall across the narrowest part of the pass, providing additional defensive advantages. King Leonidas of Sparta commanded this small but determined force, with the calm confidence of a warrior who had spent his entire life preparing for exactly this moment. At 60 years old, Leonidas was a veteran of the brutal Spartan military system known as the agogu, a training program so rigorous that it had become legendary throughout Greece. He had proven his courage in previous campaigns and his wisdom in political affairs, earning the respect of allies and enemies alike. The 300 Spartans who formed the core of Leonidas's force represented the elite of an already elite military system. Each had been personally selected by the king, chosen not just for their fighting skills, but for their character and judgment. In a departure from usual Spartan practice, all 300 were men who had already fathered sons, ensuring that the Spartan bloodline would continue if they died in battle. This selection criterion indicated that Leonidas expected this to be a suicide mission from the beginning. These Spartan warriors were the products of the most intensive military training program in the ancient world. From the age of 7, they had lived in communal barracks, subjected to deliberate hardship designed to build physical and mental toughness. They were trained to endure pain without complaint, to obey orders without question, and to prefer death to dishonor. Their famous red cloaks, bronze armor, and lambda shields marked them as members of an exclusive military brotherhood that had never known defeat. The equipment of a Spartan hoplite reflected centuries of military evolution and practical experience. His primary weapon was the dory, an ashwood spear approximately 8 feet long with an iron point and bronze butt spike. This weapon was designed for thrusting rather than throwing, optimized for use in the tight formations of phalanx warfare. The spear's length allowed front-rank warriors to strike enemies while remaining protected behind their shields, while rear-rank soldiers could project their spears over the shoulders of men in front. The Spartan shield, or aspis, was perhaps the most distinctive piece of equipment. Made of wood and covered with bronze, it measured approximately 3 feet in diameter and weighed nearly 30 pounds. Unlike shields designed primarily for individual protection, the aspis was optimized for formation fighting. Its curved shape allowed it to rest against the warrior's left shoulder, freeing his left arm for greater mobility. More importantly, Each shield protected not just its bearer, but also the man to his right, creating an interlocking wall of bronze when warriors stood in formation. Spartan armor had evolved to balance protection with mobility. The bronze cuirass protected the torso while allowing freedom of movement for arms and shoulders. Bronze greaves protected the shins, particularly important for warriors whose fighting stance exposed their legs to enemy thrusts. The Corinthian helmet, with its distinctive cheek guards and nasal protection, provided excellent head protection while maintaining good visibility and hearing. However, equipment alone did not make Spartan warriors superior to their enemies. Their true advantage lay in training, discipline, and esprit de corps. Spartan military education emphasized unit cohesion over individual heroics. Warriors were taught to maintain formation, regardless of circumstances, to support their comrades even at personal risk, and to view breaking ranks as the ultimate dishonor. This collective discipline created a fighting effectiveness that exceeded the sum of individual capabilities. The other Greek contingents at Thermopylae, while not trained to Spartan standards, were still formidable warriors. The 700 Thespians under Demophilus represented a city that had consistently opposed Persian expansion, demonstrating courage that would soon prove legendary. The Theban contingent of 400, though their city's loyalty remained suspect, included experienced warriors familiar with central Greek terrain. Smaller forces from various other cities brought the total Greek strength to between 4,000 and 7,000 men. As the two armies came within sight of each other, the psychological impact of their first encounter became immediately apparent. Persian scouts reported back to Xerxes with descriptions of Greek preparations that the king found difficult to believe. According to these reports, the Spartans were calmly exercising and combing their long hair, showing no signs of fear or concern, despite being vastly outnumbered. This behavior puzzled and intrigued Xerxes, who summoned the exiled Spartan king Demaratus to explain what he was witnessing. Demaratus, who had been forced into exile by political enemies and now served as an advisor in the Persian court, provided insights that would prove prophetic. He explained that Spartans always groomed themselves carefully before battle, preparing their bodies as temples worthy of heroic death. The exercising and hair combing were not signs of casual indifference, but of ritual preparation for combat they expected to be their last. Demaratus further warned Xerxes that Spartans were unlike any enemies the Persians had previously encountered. They were not fighting for pay, conquest, or imperial glory, but for their homeland and their honor. Death held no terror for warriors who had been taught from childhood that a glorious death in battle was the highest achievement possible for a human being. These men would fight with a ferocity and determination that mercenaries and conscripts could not match. The Persian king's initial response to this intelligence was skepticism mixed with amusement. How could a few thousand Greeks, regardless of their training or motivation, seriously threaten an army that numbered in the hundreds of thousands? The very notion seemed to violate basic military logic. Xerxes had witnessed his armies crush much larger and better equipped forces throughout his empire. These Greeks, however brave they might be individually, could not possibly withstand the concentrated power of the Persian military machine. Yet Xerxes was also a careful commander who understood the importance of intelligence and preparation. He spent 4 days in reconnaissance and psychological warfare, allowing his troops to rest while giving the Greeks time to contemplate the hopelessness of their situation. Persian heralds were sent forward under flags of truce, offering the Greeks generous terms for surrender. They could retain their lands and properties, serve in the Persian army with honor, and enjoy the protection and prosperity that Persian rule provided throughout the empire. The Greek response to these overtures revealed the fundamental cultural divide between the two civilizations. When Persian heralds demanded the traditional tokens of submission, earth and water, representing acknowledgement of Persian sovereignty over land and sea, the Greeks refused categorically. When offered the opportunity to serve in the Persian army, they responded that they preferred to serve their own cities. Most famously, when demanded to surrender their weapons as a gesture of submission, Leonidas delivered the terse reply that would echo through history: "Come and take them." This response, molon labe in ancient Greek, encapsulated the Spartan warrior ethos in 3 simple words. It was not mere bravado, but a statement of fundamental principle. Spartan warriors were citizens first and soldiers second. Their weapons were not just tools of war, but symbols of their freedom and their civic responsibility. To surrender them voluntarily would be to renounce everything that made life worth living. The psychological warfare continued as both sides prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Xerxes ordered his army to deploy in full battle array where the Greeks could observe their overwhelming numbers. Contingent after contingent marched past the Greek position, each displaying their distinctive equipment and battle standards. The immortals alone outnumbered the entire Greek force, while the various national contingents seemed to stretch to the horizon. This display was designed to demonstrate the futility of resistance and to encourage last-minute surrenders. Throughout the Persian Empire, such demonstrations had proven effective in convincing enemies to submit without fighting. The message was clear. This was not a battle between equals, but a police action to restore order. Resistance would bring only death and destruction, while submission would bring peace and prosperity under Persian protection. However, the psychological impact worked differently than Xerxes expected. Rather than intimidating the Greeks, the sight of the massive Persian army seemed to strengthen their resolve. Greek warriors who had spent their entire lives training for battle now saw the ultimate test of their skills and courage approaching. The overwhelming odds, rather than discouraging them, confirmed that this would be a battle worthy of song and story for generations to come. The Greeks spent their waiting time in careful preparation, both physical and spiritual. Weapons were sharpened and armor adjusted for optimal fit and function. The Phocian wall was reinforced and extended, creating additional obstacles for attacking Persian forces. More importantly, religious ceremonies were conducted to ensure divine favor and to prepare warriors spiritually for the coming ordeal. Greek religious practices before battle emphasized both divine protection and acceptance of fate. Sacrifices were offered to the gods, particularly Ares, the god of war, seeking their blessing on Greek arms. Omens were carefully observed and interpreted, though the results remained ambiguous. Most significantly, the warriors engaged in ritual purification, preparing their souls for possible death and ensuring that they would be acceptable to the gods regardless of the battle's outcome. On the morning of the 5th day, August 20th, 480 BC, Xerxes finally lost patience with Greek stubbornness and ordered the attack to begin. The king expected a brief action that would crush Greek resistance and open the road to southern Greece. His battle plan was straightforward. Overwhelming numbers would be concentrated against the narrow Greek line until it broke under the pressure. Persian archers would weaken the Greek formation with missile fire, while infantry assaults would exploit any gaps that appeared. The first Persian attack was led by the Medes and Scythians, tough infantry troops from the Iranian plateau who had proven their worth in numerous previous campaigns. These warriors advanced confidently, expecting to overwhelm the small Greek force through sheer numbers and aggressive assault. They carried the shorter spears and lighter shields typical of Persian infantry, equipment optimized for individual combat and rapid movement rather than formation fighting. As the Persian infantry approached the Greek position, they encountered their first unpleasant surprise. The Phocian wall, reinforced and extended by Greek engineers, forced the attackers to bunch together in the narrow passage, negating their numerical superiority. Worse, the Greeks had not remained passively behind their defenses, but had advanced beyond the wall to meet the attack in the open ground, where their superior armor and weapons would have maximum advantage. The collision between Persian and Greek infantry provided an immediate demonstration of the tactical superiority of hoplite warfare. The Persian troops, fighting as individuals with light equipment, found themselves facing a solid wall of bronze shields backed by 8-foot spears. Greek warriors in the front rank thrust with their spears, while those behind provided support and reinforcement. The Greek formation moved as a single organism, each warrior protected by his comrades and contributing to the collective strength of the whole. The Persian attack, despite its numerical superiority, could make no impression against this disciplined wall of bronze and iron. Persian spears were too short to reach Greek warriors protected behind their large shields, while Persian shields were too small to provide adequate protection against Greek thrusting spears. Persian archers, normally a decisive factor in Persian tactics, found their arrows largely ineffective against Greek bronze armor and layered shields. The battle quickly developed into a grinding contest of endurance rather than a quick, decisive action. Persian commanders continued to feed fresh troops into the narrow front, hoping to overwhelm the Greeks through sheer attrition. However, the Greek position allowed them to rotate their warriors, bringing fresh men forward while allowing exhausted fighters to rest in the rear. This tactical flexibility, combined with superior equipment and training, enabled the small Greek force to hold off attacks by vastly superior numbers. As the day progressed, Persian casualties mounted alarmingly, while Greek losses remained relatively light. The narrow confines of the pass created a killing ground where Persian numerical superiority became a liability rather than an advantage. Fresh troops could not deploy effectively, while wounded warriors could not be evacuated quickly. Bodies began to pile up in front of the Greek position, creating additional obstacles for subsequent attackers. Persian morale, initially high due to their overwhelming numerical superiority, began to waver as attack after attack failed to make any progress against the Greek line. These were veteran troops who had conquered most of the known world, yet they found themselves helpless against a handful of Greek warriors fighting on ground of their choosing. The psychological impact of this unexpected resistance spread throughout the Persian army, raising questions about Persian invincibility that had never been asked before. Xerxes watched the battle's progress from a golden throne positioned on a nearby hill, providing him with a clear view of the action while keeping him safely removed from personal danger. Ancient sources report that the king leaped from his throne 3 times during the day's fighting, horrified by the casualties his forces were suffering and amazed by the stubborn Greek resistance. The Persian king's consternation was understandable. His military experience had taught him that overwhelming numerical superiority should produce quick, decisive victories. The ability to concentrate superior force at the point of decision was a fundamental principle of Persian strategy. Yet here, despite commanding forces that outnumbered the Greeks by at least 10 to 1, His armies could make no progress against a defensive position that should have been easily overwhelmed. As the first day's fighting drew to a close, Persian commanders called off their attacks to reassess their strategy. The results were deeply troubling from a Persian perspective. Thousands of Persian soldiers lay dead or wounded in front of the Greek position, while Greek casualties appeared to be minimal. The narrow pass had indeed neutralized Persian numerical superiority, just as Greek planners had hoped. However, the Greeks also faced serious challenges as night fell. Their small force had fought magnificently, but they had been engaged in continuous combat for an entire day against fresh enemy units. Physical exhaustion was becoming a factor, despite their superior training and conditioning. More seriously, their tactical success depended entirely on maintaining formation discipline, which would become increasingly difficult as fatigue accumulated. The second day of fighting, August 21st, brought renewed Persian assaults with modified tactics designed to overcome the previous day's failures. Xerxes committed his elite immortals to the attack, confident that his finest troops could succeed where regular infantry had failed. The immortals were the Persian army's premier unit, recruited from Persian and Median nobility, equipped with the finest weapons and armor available, and trained to the highest standards of the Persian military system. The immortals approached their assault with the confidence of troops who had never experienced defeat. Their commander, Hydarnes, was one of Xerxes' most trusted generals, a veteran of numerous campaigns who understood both Persian capabilities and tactical limitations. The attack plan called for concentrated pressure against the Greek center, supported by archery and coordinated with flanking attempts along the shoreline, where the pass was slightly wider. However, the Immortals' assault encountered the same fundamental problem that had doomed the previous day's attacks. Their equipment and training, however excellent, were not optimized for the specific challenges of fighting Greek hoplites in formation. Persian tactics emphasized individual skill and unit flexibility, while Greek hoplite warfare demanded collective discipline and formation integrity. In the narrow confines of Thermopylae, Greek advantages were maximized, while Persian strengths were minimized. The battle between the Immortals and Leonidas' Spartans became a legendary contest between two elite military systems. The Immortals fought with skill and courage, but they could not break the disciplined Greek phalanx. Persian arrows, normally devastating against lighter-equipped enemies, proved largely ineffective against Greek bronze armor. Persian spears, designed for throwing and individual combat, could not match the reach and thrusting power of Greek 8-foot dories wielded in formation. More fundamentally, the two forces were fighting for different reasons and with different expectations. The Immortals, despite their elite status, were professional soldiers fighting for imperial glory and royal favor. The Spartans were citizen warriors defending their homeland and their way of life. This difference in motivation translated into differences in battlefield behavior that became increasingly apparent as the fighting continued. Spartan tactical doctrine emphasized endurance and collective action over individual heroics. Warriors were trained to maintain formation, regardless of personal risk, to support their comrades, even when retreat might preserve their own lives, and to view survival without honor as worse than glorious death. This mindset created a level of unit cohesion and determination that professional armies, however skilled, rarely achieved. The second day's fighting also revealed Greek tactical innovations that Persian commanders had not anticipated. Leonidas employed a strategy of tactical withdrawal that drew Persian forces forward into even more confined terrain, then counterattacked when the Persians were most vulnerable. This feigned retreat required precise timing and absolute trust between warriors, capabilities that could only be developed through extensive training and shared experience. These tactical maneuvers confused and demoralized Persian attackers, who found themselves pursuing what appeared to be retreating Greeks, only to face sudden counterattacks by fresh warriors in better positions. The Greeks' ability to coordinate such complex movements while under enemy pressure demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that Persian commanders had not expected from supposedly inferior barbarian forces. As the second day's fighting intensified, both sides began to show the strain of continuous combat. Persian casualties continued to mount at an alarming rate, with some estimates suggesting that over 10,000 Persian soldiers had been killed or wounded in 2 days of fighting. These losses were beginning to affect Persian morale throughout the army, as word spread that the supposedly invincible immortals had been stopped by a handful of Greek warriors. Greek casualties, while much lower in absolute numbers, represented a higher percentage of their total force. Every Greek warrior lost was irreplaceable, while Persian commanders could draw upon seemingly unlimited reserves. The Greeks also faced the challenge of maintaining their formation's integrity as fatigue and casualties created gaps in their line. The physical demands of hoplite warfare were enormous, requiring strength, endurance, and coordination that became more difficult to maintain as the battle progressed. Yet Greek morale remained remarkably high despite their desperate situation. The success of their tactical system against overwhelming odds confirmed their belief in the superiority of their military methods and their way of life. Each Persian attack that was repulsed provided evidence that free men fighting for their homeland could indeed defeat professional armies fighting for conquest. This psychological victory was as important as the tactical success in maintaining Greek resistance. The evening of the second day brought a temporary lull in the fighting, as both sides tended their wounded and prepared for what everyone expected would be the decisive third day. Persian commanders held urgent conferences to discuss alternative strategies, while Greek leaders prepared their men for what they suspected might be their final battle. The stage was set for the climactic events that would transform a local tactical engagement into one of history's most famous military encounters. Chapter 4: The Betrayal and Final Stand. The third dawn at Thermopylae broke with an ominous stillness that seemed to permeate the very air around the narrow pass. For 2 days, the small Greek force had achieved the impossible, holding back the mightiest army the world had ever seen. The bodies of Persian dead littered the ground before the Greek position, testament to the lethal effectiveness of hoplite warfare in terrain that favored the defender. Yet both commanders understood that this stalemate could not continue indefinitely. The Persians possessed virtually unlimited reserves, while every Greek casualty brought the defenders closer to the inevitable collapse of their line. King Xerxes had spent the previous evening in increasingly agitated consultation with his generals and advisors. The failure of 2 full days of assaults, including attacks by his elite immortals, had shaken his confidence in Persian military superiority. More seriously, it had begun to raise questions among his diverse army about the wisdom and necessity of this campaign. If a handful of Greek warriors could stop the entire Persian war machine, what did that say about Persian invincibility? The great king's frustration was compounded by intelligence reports from other fronts. At Artemisium, the Greek fleet under Themistocles was holding its own against Persian naval forces, preventing the coordinated land-sea assault that had been central to Persian strategy. Worse, disturbing news was arriving from various parts of the empire about potential unrest among recently conquered peoples. The longer the Greeks held out, the greater the risk that their example would inspire rebellion elsewhere. Persian military doctrine had not prepared commanders for this type of prolonged assault against a prepared defensive position. Persian armies were designed for rapid campaigns of conquest, using overwhelming force to achieve quick, decisive victories that would minimize casualties and maximize psychological impact. The grinding attrition warfare at Thermopylae was exactly the type of engagement Persian strategy sought to avoid, yet circumstances had forced them into precisely this situation. The Persian army's diverse composition, normally a source of strength, was beginning to create problems as the campaigns stalled. Units from different parts of the empire had varying levels of training, equipment, and motivation. Some contingents, particularly those from recently conquered territories, were beginning to question whether their interests were truly served by this Greek adventure. The sight of elite Persian troops being bloodied by a small force of determined defenders was having a corrosive effect on overall morale. Xerxes understood that he needed a breakthrough, not just tactically, but psychologically. The Persian Empire's stability depended on maintaining the perception of invincibility. If word spread that Persian armies could be stopped by any determined resistance, the empire's control over its vast territories would be endangered. The Greek resistance at Thermopylae had to be crushed quickly and decisively, with sufficient brutality to discourage future defiance. As Persian commanders debated their limited options, fate intervened in the form of a local Greek named Ephialtes. This man, whose name would become synonymous with treachery in Greek memory, approached the Persian camp under cover of darkness with information that would change the course of the battle. Ephialtes was a Malian, one of the local people who knew the mountain paths around Thermopylae better than anyone else. His motivations for betraying his fellow Greeks remain unclear to history. Perhaps he sought Persian gold, perhaps he bore grudges against neighboring communities, or perhaps he simply calculated that Persian victory was inevitable and wished to be on the winning side. Whatever his motivations, Ephialtes brought Xerxes the key to breaking the Greek position. He revealed the existence of a mountain path called the Anapeia that wound through the heights above Thermopylae, emerging behind the Greek position at a place called Alpini. This path was known to local inhabitants and had been used in previous conflicts, but its difficulty and the time required to traverse it made it unsuitable for large military operations. However, for a select force of experienced mountain troops, it represented a way to outflank the seemingly impregnable Greek position. The intelligence provided by Ephialtes was exactly what Persian commanders needed. Rather than continue the costly frontal assaults that had achieved nothing but casualty lists, they could now employ the classic Persian tactical doctrine of envelopment and encirclement. A force moving through the mountain path could attack the Greeks from behind, while the main army continued its frontal pressure. Caught between two forces and unable to maintain their defensive formation, the Greek position would collapse. Xerxes immediately recognized the strategic value of this intelligence and ordered preparations for a night march. The force selected for this crucial mission was composed of Hydarnes and his immortals, the elite troops whose previous frontal assault had been repulsed, but whose courage and skill remained unquestioned. These warriors were among the finest in the Persian army, experienced in mountain warfare and capable of the stealth and endurance required for a difficult night movement through hostile territory. The mountain path that would determine the fate of Thermopylae was neither a secret nor completely undefended. Greek commanders had been aware of its existence from the beginning and had taken measures to guard it. A force of 1,000 Phocian hoplites had been stationed along the path with orders to prevent any Persian flanking movement. These Phocians were local troops familiar with the terrain and motivated to defend their homeland against invasion. However, the Phocian force faced significant challenges in fulfilling their mission. The path was long and winding, with multiple routes and alternative passages that made comprehensive defense difficult with limited manpower. The Phocians had to spread their forces thinly to cover all possible approaches, reducing their ability to concentrate against any specific threat. Moreover, they were militia rather than professional soldiers, lacking the training and equipment of either Persian immortals or Spartan hoplites. As night fell on August 22nd, Hydarnes led his picked force of immortals into the mountains, guided by Ephialtes and moving with the stealth that had made Persian forces feared throughout the empire. The march was treacherous, conducted in darkness over rough terrain that required careful navigation and absolute silence. The immortals were burdened not only by their weapons and armor, but also by the need to maintain formation and communication in conditions that would have challenged even experienced mountain troops. The night march became a test of Persian military professionalism and individual courage. The immortals had to traverse narrow mountain paths in single file, unable to maintain their normal formation or provide mutual support if attacked. Each warrior was dependent on his own skills and the guidance of those ahead of him. The darkness, the difficult terrain, and the knowledge that discovery would mean death or capture created psychological pressures that tested even elite troops. Meanwhile, at the main Persian camp, preparations were underway for a renewed frontal assault designed to coordinate with the flanking movement. This attack would be larger and more determined than previous efforts, intended to pin the Greek defenders in position, while Hydarnes completed his encirclement. Persian engineers worked through the night to prepare siege equipment and assault bridges that might overcome the Greek defensive positions. The Greek position during this crucial night reflected both confidence and growing concern about their situation. The success of the previous 2 days had demonstrated that their tactical system could indeed defeat Persian attacks, but it had also revealed the limitations of their position. Greek casualties, while much lower than Persian losses, were still significant for such a small force. More importantly, the physical and psychological strain of continuous combat was beginning to show. Leonidas and his officers understood that time was working against them. Their tactical success had been bought at the cost of irreplaceable warriors, and their ability to maintain formation discipline was being eroded by fatigue and casualties. The arrival of reinforcements had been promised, but not materialized, suggesting that other Greek cities were either unable or unwilling to commit additional troops to what increasingly appeared to be a desperate venture. The Spartan king had also received disturbing intelligence about Persian flanking attempts. While the Phocian guard on the mountain path had reported no enemy contact, Persian reconnaissance activities had increased significantly. Local inhabitants reported Persian patrols in the mountains, and captured Persian soldiers had mentioned preparations for special operations. The possibility of encirclement was very much on Greek minds as the third day approached. Despite these concerns, Greek morale remained remarkably high. The warriors at Thermopylae had accomplished something that many had thought impossible. They had stopped the Persian war machine in its tracks. Every hour they held the pass was another hour for other Greek cities to prepare their defenses, another demonstration that Persian armies were not invincible, another proof that free men fighting for their homeland could defeat professional armies fighting for conquest. The religious and cultural significance of their stand was not lost on the Greek warriors. They understood that they were participating in an event that would be remembered for generations, that their names would be honored in song and story throughout the Greek world. The prospect of glorious death in defense of Greece's freedom was not terrifying, but inspiring to men, raised in a culture that valued honor above life. As the first light of dawn began to illuminate the mountain peaks above Thermopylae, the carefully laid Persian plan began to unfold. Hydarnes and his immortals had successfully navigated the treacherous mountain path during the night, emerging at Alpeni as the sun rose. Their night march had been a remarkable feat of military skill and endurance, demonstrating the high quality of Persian elite troops and the effectiveness of their training and discipline. The Phocian guards stationed along the mountain path were taken completely by surprise. The Persian approach had been so stealthy that the first warning came when immortal scouts were already within striking distance of the Phocian positions. The initial contact occurred when Persian soldiers disturbed piles of autumn leaves, creating rustling sounds that alerted Phocian sentries to the approaching threat. The reaction of the Phocian guards to the Persian flanking movement became one of the most controversial aspects of the entire Thermopylae campaign. Faced with a determined attack by elite Persian troops, the Phocians initially attempted to form a defensive line and resist the Persian advance. However, when they realized the size and quality of the force they faced, most of the Phocian troops retreated to higher ground rather than making a desperate stand. This Phocian withdrawal, while tactically understandable, had catastrophic strategic consequences. It left the mountain path open for the Persian advance and eliminated the early warning system that might have allowed the main Greek force to adapt to the changed situation. Greek commanders at Thermopylae learned of the Persian flanking movement only when it was too late to organize an effective response. The news of Persian success in the mountains reached the Greek position through multiple channels almost simultaneously. Deserters from the Persian camp, possibly planted deliberately, brought word that a Persian force had successfully traversed the mountain path. Phocian messengers arrived with confirmation that their position had been overrun and that enemy troops were advancing toward the rear of the Greek position. Most ominously, Greek scouts on the nearby hills reported seeing Persian troops moving through the high ground behind Thermopylae. The intelligence about Persian flanking success created an immediate crisis of command for the Greek forces. Their defensive position, which had been so effective against frontal assault, now became a potential trap. With Persian forces approaching from both front and rear, the Greek army faced the prospect of complete encirclement and annihilation. The tactical advantages that had enabled their previous success were about to become fatal disadvantages. Leonidas faced the most difficult decision of his military career. He could attempt to withdraw his entire force before the Persian encirclement was completed, potentially saving most of his men, but abandoning the defensive position that had cost so much to establish. Alternatively, he could remain in position and fight to the death, accepting certain destruction, but potentially inflicting maximum casualties on the Persian forces and buying additional time for other Greek preparations. The Spartan king's decision reflected both practical military calculation and deep cultural values. A fighting withdrawal might preserve more Greek lives in the short term, but it would also abandon central Greece to Persian occupation and might demoralize other Greek cities considering resistance. More fundamentally, Spartan military culture made retreat in the face of the enemy virtually unthinkable, especially for a king whose personal honor and his city's reputation were at stake. The council of war that Leonidas convened with his allied commanders revealed the complex political and military factors involved in this desperate situation. Representatives from various Greek cities had different perspectives on the proper course of action, based partly on their assessment of military realities and partly on their cities' political situations and strategic interests. Some Allied commanders argued for immediate withdrawal while escape remained possible. From their perspective, the Greek force had already accomplished its mission by delaying the Persian advance and demonstrating that Persian armies could be defeated. Preserving the experienced warriors for future battles would serve Greek interests better than sacrificing them in a hopeless last stand. The tactical success at Thermopylae had already provided the moral victory that Greek resistance required. Other commanders, particularly those from cities directly threatened by Persian advance, favored continued resistance regardless of the odds. Every additional hour that Persian forces remained engaged at Thermopylae was another hour for their home cities to complete defensive preparations. The psychological impact of a heroic last stand might also inspire greater resistance throughout Greece, while abandoning the position might be seen as evidence that Greek resolve was weakening. Leonidas's response to these debates became legendary for its combination of practical wisdom and heroic commitment. Rather than imposing a single course of action on all Allied forces, he gave each contingent the freedom to choose its own fate. Those who wished to withdraw could do so with honor, carrying word of the Persian flanking movement to other Greek cities. Those who chose to remain would fight to the death alongside the Spartans. The majority of Greek forces chose withdrawal, a decision that was both strategically sound and personally courageous. These men would carry news of Persian movements to other Greek positions, help coordinate future resistance efforts, and preserve experienced warriors for subsequent battles. Their withdrawal was not cowardice, but tactical wisdom, ensuring that the sacrifice at Thermopylae would serve broader Greek strategic interests. However, several contingents chose to remain with Leonidas for the final battle. The 700 Thespians under Demophilus refused to abandon their Spartan allies, declaring that they would share whatever fate awaited the defenders. This decision by the Thespians reflected both personal loyalty and civic pride, as their city had consistently opposed Persian expansion, and they were determined to maintain that resistance regardless of the consequences. The 400 Thebans presented a more complex case. Their city's political position was ambiguous, with pro-Persian factions competing against those favoring resistance. The Theban contingent at Thermopylae may have been kept as hostages to ensure their city's loyalty, or they may have represented genuine opponents of Persian rule within Theban politics. Their presence in the final battle would later become a source of controversy and conflicting interpretations. As the Allied withdrawal began, Leonidas prepared his remaining force for what everyone understood would be their final battle. The king's preparations reflected both practical military considerations and the ritual requirements of Spartan military culture. Warriors prepared their weapons and armor for maximum effectiveness, while also engaging in religious observances designed to ensure divine favor and proper spiritual preparation for death. The psychological transformation that occurred among the remaining Greek forces as they prepared for certain death was one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire Thermopylae campaign. Men who had spent 3 days fighting desperately for survival now faced the prospect of inevitable death with calm determination. The knowledge that they would not survive the coming battle, rather than demoralizing them, seemed to liberate them from normal tactical constraints and human fears. Spartan military culture had prepared these warriors for exactly this situation through decades of training and indoctrination. The Agog system had taught them that a glorious death in battle was the highest achievement possible for a Spartan warrior. The famous Spartan saying, "Come back with your shield or on it," reflected a value system that placed honor above survival and collective duty above individual preservation. The morning of August 23rd, 480 BC, brought the final phase of the Battle of Thermopylae, as Persian forces launched their coordinated assault from both front and rear. Xerxes had positioned himself to observe this climactic battle, confident that the encirclement would finally break Greek resistance and open the road to southern Greece. The Persian attack plan called for simultaneous pressure from multiple directions, preventing the Greeks from concentrating their defensive strength at any single point. The tactical situation facing the remaining Greek forces was hopeless from a conventional military perspective. Surrounded by vastly superior numbers and unable to retreat, they faced certain annihilation, regardless of their fighting skill or courage. However, Leonidas had not chosen to make this final stand for conventional tactical reasons. His goal was not military victory, which had become impossible, but maximum impact on Persian morale and Greek inspiration. The Greeks abandoned their defensive position behind the Phocian wall and advanced to meet the Persian assault in more open ground where they could maneuver more freely. This tactical decision reflected their acceptance that survival was impossible and their determination to inflict maximum casualties before being overwhelmed. By fighting in the open, they could use their superior individual skills and weapons to greatest advantage, even though they would ultimately be surrounded and destroyed. The final Battle of Thermopylae became a legendary display of martial skill and heroic courage. The remaining Greek warriors fought with the desperate fury of men who had nothing left to lose, combined with the disciplined efficiency of the finest military training in the ancient world. Persian sources later acknowledged that they had never faced enemies who fought with such skill and determination, even in the face of certain death. Leonidas himself fell early in this final combat, struck down while leading a charge against Persian positions. His death galvanized the remaining Spartans, who fought desperately to recover his body and prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The struggle over the king's corpse became the focal point of the battle's final phase, with Greeks and Persians surging back and forth in savage close combat. The death of their king, rather than demoralizing the Spartans, seemed to inspire them to even greater ferocity. Spartan military culture had taught them to revere their commanders and to consider the loss of a king's body to be an unforgivable disgrace. The remaining Spartans fought with superhuman effort to fulfill their duty to their fallen king, displaying courage that impressed even their enemies. 4 times the Greeks fought their way to Leonidas's body, and 4 times they were driven back by superior Persian numbers. The casualties on both sides during this desperate struggle were enormous, with some of the finest warriors from both armies falling in the savage melee. 2 of Xerxes' brothers, Abracomes and Hyperanthes, were among the Persian dead, indicating the intensity of the fighting and the high price paid for final victory. As the Greek force was gradually whittled down by continuous combat against overwhelming odds, the survivors made their final stand on a small hill within the pass. Here, in a last desperate circle, they fought with spears until their spears were broken, then with swords until their swords were shattered, and finally with whatever weapons they could find or with their bare hands. The end came when Persian archers, unable to engage the Greeks in close combat due to their fierce resistance, surrounded the hilltop position and shot down the remaining defenders with volleys of arrows. This final phase of the battle demonstrated both Persian tactical flexibility and the ultimate futility of individual courage against overwhelming numbers and superior positioning. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true cost of Persian victory. While the Greek force had been completely destroyed, Persian casualties were enormous by ancient standards. Estimates suggest that over 20,000 Persian soldiers had been killed or wounded in the 3 days of fighting at Thermopylae, a casualty rate that shocked Persian commanders and demoralized much of the army. The Immortals alone had lost thousands of their finest warriors, severely weakening this elite unit. More importantly, the psychological impact of the battle was exactly the opposite of what Xerxes had intended. Rather than demonstrating Persian invincibility, Thermopylae had shown that Persian armies could be defeated by determined resistance in proper positions. The fact that 300 Spartans and their allies had held off the entire Persian war machine for 3 days became a source of inspiration for Greek resistance throughout the remainder of the war. Xerxes' treatment of the Greek dead revealed both his anger at the unexpected resistance and his grudging respect for their courage. Initially, the Persian king ordered that Leonidas's head be cut off and his body crucified, a treatment normally reserved for slaves and criminals. However, later Persian sources suggest that Xerxes came to regret this dishonorable treatment of a brave enemy, recognizing that it diminished his own reputation for magnanimity toward defeated foes. The battle's immediate strategic consequences were mixed. Persian forces had finally broken through the Thermopylae position and could now advance into central Greece without significant resistance. Athens and other cities faced the immediate prospect of Persian occupation, with all the destruction and enslavement that implied. The Greek strategy of forward defense had clearly failed, and new defensive positions would have to be established further south. However, the tactical victory had been bought at such a high cost that it called into question the entire Persian strategy for conquering Greece. The casualties suffered at Thermopylae, combined with simultaneous losses in naval fighting at Artemisium, had significantly weakened Persian military capabilities. More seriously, the stubborn resistance had inspired Greek morale throughout the peninsula and demonstrated that Persian forces were not invincible. As news of the battle spread throughout the Greek world, the heroic sacrifice at Thermopylae became a rallying cry for continued resistance. The 300 Spartans who had died with their king became legendary symbols of courage and devotion to duty. Their example inspired other Greek cities to continue fighting even when the odds seemed hopeless, contributing to the eventual Greek victory in the broader war. The Battle of Thermopylae thus ended with a Persian tactical victory that would prove to be a strategic defeat. Xerxes had won his passage to southern Greece, but at a cost that would ultimately doom his entire campaign. The 3 days of fighting in the narrow pass had transformed a local defensive action into one of history's most famous examples of courage against overwhelming odds, ensuring that the names of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans would be remembered as long as human civilization endured. Chapter 5: Aftermath and Legacy of Thermopylae. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of Thermopylae presented a scene of devastation that would forever be etched into the memory of both victors and the broader Greek world. As the dust settled over the narrow pass where so much blood had been spilled, the true cost of Persian victory became starkly apparent. The ground was carpeted with the bodies of the fallen, Persian and Greek alike, testament to 3 days of the most intense combat the ancient world had ever witnessed. The sweet smell of victory that should have accompanied Persian triumph was tainted by the staggering price paid for passage through this narrow gateway to southern Greece. King Xerxes, walked among the battlefield in the immediate aftermath, surveying the carnage with emotions that ancient sources describe as complex and conflicted. The great king had expected a swift, decisive victory that would demonstrate Persian invincibility and open the road to Greek conquest. Instead, he found himself master of a charnel house where his finest troops had been decimated by a handful of Greek warriors who had refused to acknowledge the futility of their position. The sight of thousands of Persian dead, including members of his own family and elite guards, provided a sobering lesson in the true cost of imperial ambition. The Persian casualties at Thermopylae were unprecedented for a victorious army. Conservative estimates suggest that over 20,000 Persian soldiers had been killed or wounded during the 3 days of fighting, a loss rate that shocked commanders and demoralized troops throughout the army. The Immortals, Xerxes' elite guard, and the pride of the Persian military system had been particularly hard hit. Nearly half of this supposedly invincible unit had fallen in the desperate fighting, requiring extensive recruitment and training to restore it to full strength. More seriously, from a strategic perspective, the casualties were not random losses that could be easily replaced. The dead included many of the most experienced officers and elite warriors in the Persian army, men whose military skills and leadership capabilities had been honed through decades of successful campaigns. The loss of such experienced personnel would have lasting effects on Persian military effectiveness throughout the remainder of the Greek campaign and beyond. The psychological impact of these losses extended far beyond their immediate tactical significance. The Persian Empire had been built on a reputation for invincibility that made most enemies submit without fighting. The massive casualties at Thermopylae called this reputation into question, raising doubts among both Persian troops and subject peoples about the empire's military supremacy. If a few hundred Greek warriors could inflict such damage on the Persian war machine, what did that say about Persian power more broadly? These doubts were exacerbated by the manner in which the Greek warriors had fought and died. Persian military culture respected courage and skill in battle, but the suicidal determination displayed by the Spartans and their allies was unlike anything Persian commanders had previously encountered. These men had fought, knowing that death was certain, yet they had continued to resist with undiminished ferocity until the very end. Such behavior challenged Persian assumptions about human nature and military motivation. The treatment of the Greek dead became a source of controversy that would haunt Xerxes for the remainder of his life. In his initial anger at the unexpected resistance, the Persian king had ordered that Leonidas be decapitated and his body crucified, treatment normally reserved for criminals and rebels rather than fallen enemies. This violation of conventional military courtesy was widely seen as evidence of Persian frustration and loss of composure, further damaging their reputation for magnanimous treatment of brave foes. However, Persian sources suggest that Xerxes later came to regret this dishonorable treatment of the Spartan king. As his initial anger cooled and he reflected on the courage displayed by his enemies, the great king reportedly acknowledged that Leonidas had died as a hero deserving of respect rather than as a criminal deserving of punishment. This change of heart, while it came too late to undo the damage to Persian reputation, indicated growing Persian recognition of Greek military virtues. The immediate strategic consequences of Thermopylae were exactly what Persian planners had intended. With the pass finally cleared of Greek defenders, the Persian army could advance into central Greece without significant resistance. The way lay open to Boeotia, Attica, and ultimately the Peloponnese itself. Greek cities that had hoped the northern defense would hold now faced the terrifying prospect of direct Persian assault with diminished forces and weakened morale. The fall of Thermopylae also had immediate implications for Greek naval operations at Artemisium. With the land position compromised, the Greek fleet could no longer maintain its advanced position without risk of being cut off and destroyed. Despite achieving tactical success against Persian naval forces, the Greek admirals were forced to withdraw southward, abandoning the coordinated land-sea defense that had been central to their strategic planning. The retreat from Artemisium was conducted with considerably more success than might have been expected given the desperate circumstances. Under the leadership of Themistocles, the Greek fleet managed an orderly withdrawal that preserved most of their ships and crews for future operations. The Persian navy, weakened by its own losses in the fighting around Artemisium, was unable to prevent this retreat or to exploit their strategic advantage effectively. As news of Thermopylae's fall spread throughout Greece, it created both panic and inspiration in equal measure. Cities directly in the Persian army's path faced immediate decisions about surrender or resistance, knowing that their choice might determine the fate of their entire populations. Athens, the primary target of Persian vengeance, began the massive evacuation that would see most of its population relocated to nearby islands under naval protection. The Athenian evacuation, decreed by the Assembly on Themistocles' recommendation, was one of the largest population movements in ancient history. Hundreds of thousands of people, men, women, children, elderly, and slaves, were transported to Salamis, Aegina, and Troezen in a massive operation that strained Greek naval resources to their limits. The decision to abandon the city rather than attempt its defense reflected hard-headed strategic calculation rather than cowardice, as Athenian leaders recognized that their future lay on the sea rather than behind city walls. However, the fall of Thermopylae also inspired renewed determination among Greeks committed to continued resistance. The heroic sacrifice of Leonidas and his men provided exactly the kind of inspirational example that Greek culture was prepared to celebrate and emulate. Rather than demoralizing potential resistors, the Spartan example encouraged other Greeks to believe that honor and glory could be achieved even in defeat, provided one fought with sufficient courage and determination. The propagation of the Thermopylae story throughout Greece became a crucial factor in maintaining resistance morale. The details of the three-day battle, the courage of the defenders, and the enormous Persian casualties spread rapidly through Greek communication networks. Poets and storytellers began crafting narratives that emphasized the heroic aspects of the defense while minimizing the ultimate tactical failure. The most famous of these early commemorations was the epitaph composed by the poet Simonides for the Spartan dead. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This simple verse captured the essence of Spartan military culture and the meaning of the Thermopylae sacrifice in terms that resonated throughout Greek society. The epitaph emphasized duty, obedience, and sacrifice for the common good, values that all Greeks could understand and respect. The Persian advance into central Greece, following Thermopylae, proceeded more slowly than might have been expected, given their decisive tactical victory. The massive casualties suffered in the pass had forced Xerxes to pause for reorganization and reinforcement before continuing his campaign. More seriously, the stubborn resistance had demonstrated that Greek opposition would be far more determined and costly than Persian planners had anticipated. The Persian army that resumed its advance was significantly different from the confident force that had first approached Thermopylae. The enormous casualties had forced major reorganization of command structures and unit compositions. The Immortals, traditionally the army's elite shock troops, had to be rebuilt almost from scratch, using less experienced personnel. Other units had suffered similar losses that would affect their effectiveness throughout the remainder of the campaign. More subtly, but perhaps more importantly, Persian confidence had been shaken by their Pyrrhic victory. The army that had seemed invincible as it crossed the Hellespont now knew that it could be hurt, that Greek resistance was genuine and effective, and that victory would come at a much higher price than originally anticipated. This psychological shift would have lasting effects on Persian military performance in subsequent engagements. The advance through Boeotia provided additional evidence of changing Greek attitudes toward Persian invasion. Unlike the situation in northern Greece, where most cities had submitted without resistance, central Greek communities were more likely to evacuate or resist rather than accept Persian occupation. The cities of Thespiae and Plataea were found abandoned and were subsequently burned by Persian forces, but their populations had escaped to continue resistance elsewhere. These evacuations represented a new phase in Greek defensive strategy. Rather than attempting to hold fixed positions against superior Persian forces, Greek communities were increasingly adopting mobility and dispersion as defensive techniques. This approach denied the Persians the quick, decisive victories they needed while preserving Greek manpower for future operations. The arrival of Persian forces in Attica in September 480 BC marked the culmination of Xerxes' invasion plan. The great city of Athens, symbol of Greek democracy and naval power, lay open to Persian conquest. However, the Persians found a largely empty city, its population evacuated, and its treasures removed. The capture of Athens, which should have been the campaign's crowning achievement, instead became a hollow victory over abandoned buildings and empty temples. The Persian occupation and destruction of Athens provided dramatic propaganda value but limited strategic benefit. The burning of the Acropolis and the destruction of temples satisfied Persian desires for revenge against the city that had supported the Ionian revolt. But it did nothing to eliminate Athenian naval power or democratic institutions. The Athenian government and military forces remained intact on Salamis, still capable of continued resistance. More seriously, from a Persian perspective, the destruction of Athens created new urgency for resolving the Greek campaign quickly. The massive army that Xerxes had assembled could not be maintained indefinitely in hostile territory. Supply lines stretched back to Asia were vulnerable to Greek naval interdiction, while the approach of winter would create additional logistical challenges. The campaign needed a decisive conclusion soon, or Persian forces would face the prospect of fighting through the winter in enemy territory. The Persian naval position was even more precarious than the land situation. Despite their numerical superiority, Persian fleets had suffered significant casualties in the fighting around Artemisium and in subsequent operations. More importantly, they had not achieved the decisive victory over Greek naval forces that Persian strategy required. The Greek fleet remained intact and continued to threaten Persian supply lines and coastal operations. This strategic situation led directly to the naval Battle of Salamis, fought in late September 480 BC in the narrow straits between the mainland and Salamis Island. Themistocles, the Athenian admiral, had carefully chosen this position to neutralize Persian numerical advantages, just as Leonidas had done at Thermopylae. The confined waters would prevent effective coordination among the diverse Persian fleet, while allowing disciplined Greek squadrons to concentrate their attack against selected enemy units. The Battle of Salamis became the decisive engagement of the Persian Wars, but its outcome was directly influenced by the precedent set at Thermopylae. The knowledge that Greek forces could defeat Persian attacks in properly chosen positions encouraged Greek naval commanders to seek battle rather than continue withdrawing. Conversely, Persian commanders approached the naval engagement with less confidence than they might have possessed before experiencing the costly victory at Thermopylae. The battle itself vindicated Greek tactical theories and strategic planning. In the cramped waters of the Salamis Straits, Persian numerical superiority became a liability as ships collided with each other and formations became disordered. The Greek fleet, fighting with the desperation of men defending their homeland and inspired by the example of Thermopylae, achieved a crushing victory that fundamentally altered the strategic balance of the war. The Persian defeat at Salamis was far more decisive than their victory at Thermopylae had been. Unlike the land battle, where Persian casualties had been heavy but their strategic objectives achieved, the naval engagement resulted in complete Persian failure with catastrophic losses. Hundreds of Persian ships were sunk or captured, thousands of experienced sailors and marines were lost, and Persian naval supremacy in the Aegean was permanently broken. The psychological impact of Salamis was the mirror image of Thermopylae's effect. Where the land battle had shown that Persians could be hurt but would ultimately prevail through superior numbers, the naval engagement demonstrated that they could be completely defeated when Greeks fought on favorable terms. The combination of these two battles created a new understanding of Persian limitations that would influence the remainder of the war. Xerxes' response to the Salamis disaster revealed how profoundly the campaign had diverged from his original expectations. Rather than pressing forward with his invasion, the great king decided to return to Asia with most of his army, leaving only a select force under Mardonius to complete the conquest of Greece. This decision effectively conceded that the campaign had failed in its primary objective of demonstrating Persian invincibility and securing quick Greek submission. The Persian withdrawal after Salamis vindicated the Greek strategy of resistance that had been initiated at Thermopylae. By fighting successive delaying actions that inflicted maximum casualties on Persian forces, the Greeks had transformed what should have been a quick campaign of conquest into a prolonged and costly war of attrition. The moral example set by Leonidas and his 300 Spartans had provided the inspiration necessary to sustain this resistance, despite repeated tactical defeats. The force that Mardonius commanded for the continued Persian campaign was significantly smaller and less capable than the army that had originally invaded Greece. The withdrawal of Xerxes and the elite units that accompanied him left Persian forces in Greece vulnerable to concentrated Greek counterattack. More importantly, the Persian defeat at Salamis had eliminated the naval support that was essential for maintaining Persian supply lines and preventing Greek reinforcement. The final phase of the Persian invasion culminated in the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, where the remaining Persian forces were decisively defeated by a combined Greek army. This land battle completed the reversal of fortune that had begun at Salamis, eliminating Persian military power in Greece and forcing the complete evacuation of Xerxes' invasion force. The victory at Plataea was made possible by the naval supremacy gained at Salamis, which in turn had been inspired by the moral example of Thermopylae. The long-term consequences of Thermopylae extended far beyond the immediate military campaign. The battle established a template for resistance against overwhelming odds that would inspire military commanders and political leaders for millennia. The idea that a small force of determined defenders could achieve moral victory, even in tactical defeat, became a cornerstone of Western military thinking and political philosophy. The Spartan military system that produced the heroes of Thermopylae became a subject of intense study and admiration throughout the ancient world. The Agog training program, Spartan discipline, and the warrior ethos that enabled 300 men to hold off the Persian Empire became models for military education from ancient Rome to modern military academies. The Spartan ideal of citizen soldiers who placed duty above personal survival influenced military cultures throughout Western civilization. The political implications of Thermopylae were equally significant. The battle demonstrated that free citizens fighting for their homeland could defeat professional armies fighting for imperial conquest. This lesson became central to democratic political theory, providing evidence that popular government could successfully defend itself against despotic power. The contrast between Persian autocracy and Greek freedom became a fundamental theme in Western political thought. The cultural legacy of Thermopylae proved even more enduring than its military and political impacts. The story of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans became one of the foundational myths of Western civilization, retold and reinterpreted by each generation according to its own values and circumstances. From ancient Greek poetry to modern cinema, the basic narrative of courage against impossible odds has remained compelling across cultures and centuries. The historical accuracy of various Thermopylae accounts has been debated by scholars since ancient times, but the essential truth of the story has never been seriously questioned. Archaeological evidence confirms the basic outline of events, while the consistency of sources from different periods and perspectives supports the reliability of major details. More importantly, the battle's significance lies not in precise tactical details, but in its demonstration of human courage and determination under extreme circumstances. The educational value of Thermopylae as a case study in leadership, courage, and sacrifice has made it a staple of military and moral instruction throughout Western history. From ancient Greek schools to modern leadership training programs, the example of Leonidas has been used to illustrate principles of command responsibility, personal courage, and devotion to duty. The battle provides concrete examples of abstract virtues in ways that theoretical discussions cannot match. The strategic lessons of Thermopylae have also remained relevant across changing military technologies and tactical doctrines. The importance of terrain selection, the value of defensive positions, the psychological factors in combat, and the relationship between tactical and strategic objectives are timeless principles illustrated by the battle. Military academies continue to study Thermopylae not as ancient history, but as a source of current insights into warfare and leadership. The commemorative traditions established in ancient Greece to honor the Thermopylae dead created precedents for military memorialization that continue to influence modern practices. The concept of the unknown soldier, the tradition of national military cemeteries, and the custom of honoring military sacrifice through public monuments all trace their origins to ancient Greek practices that were crystallized by the Thermopylae example. The battle's influence on concepts of heroism and sacrifice extended well beyond military contexts. The Thermopylae example has been invoked by political leaders, social reformers, and ordinary citizens facing overwhelming odds in causes they considered just. The idea that moral victory can be achieved even in tactical defeat has provided inspiration for resistance movements, civil rights campaigns, and other struggles against superior power. Modern archaeological investigations at Thermopylae have provided new insights into the battle while confirming the essential accuracy of ancient accounts. Excavations have revealed the locations of key tactical positions, uncovered weapons and equipment from the battle, and traced the changes in local geography that have occurred since ancient times. These discoveries have enhanced understanding of the tactical situation while validating the historical reliability of sources like Herodotus. The geographic changes at Thermopylae since ancient times have been particularly significant for understanding the battle's tactical dynamics. Deposits from the Spercheios River have moved the coastline several miles seaward, transforming the narrow pass of antiquity into a broad plain. This siltation process has made it difficult for modern visitors to appreciate the confined nature of the ancient battlefield, but careful analysis has allowed historians to reconstruct the original terrain with considerable accuracy. The discovery of the Colonus Hill, where ancient sources indicate the final Greek stand took place, has provided particularly valuable insights into the battle's concluding phase. Archaeological evidence suggests intense fighting in this area, with numerous weapon fragments and other military artifacts supporting ancient descriptions of desperate hand-to-hand combat. The hill's strategic position confirms ancient accounts of its importance in the final phase of the battle. The international recognition of Thermopylae's historical significance has led to its designation as a protected historical site, and the construction of memorials honoring both Greek and Persian participants. Modern monuments acknowledge the courage displayed by warriors on both sides, while emphasizing the battle's significance for the development of Western civilization. These memorials serve both educational and inspirational purposes for contemporary visitors. The scholarly study of Thermopylae has evolved considerably as historical methodology has become more sophisticated and archaeological evidence has accumulated. Earlier treatments, influenced by Romantic nationalism and classical education, emphasized heroic and moral aspects of the story. Modern scholarship, while still recognizing these elements, has focused more on tactical analysis, strategic context, and cultural significance. The debate over casualty figures at Thermopylae illustrates the challenges of ancient military history and the evolution of historical methodology. Ancient sources provide numbers that modern scholars consider exaggerated, but the precise extent of exaggeration remains controversial. Contemporary historians use comparative analysis, archaeological evidence, and logistical calculations to develop more realistic estimates while acknowledging the inherent uncertainties in ancient military data. The question of Persian motivations for the Greek campaign has also been re-examined as scholars have developed better understanding of Achaemenid imperial ideology and administrative practices. Earlier interpretations emphasized personal revenge and imperial ambition, while more recent analysis has focused on strategic necessities and ideological imperatives within the Persian system. This scholarly evolution has produced more nuanced understanding of the conflict's broader significance. The role of Ephialtes in the battle's outcome has been particularly controversial, with debates over his motivations, the significance of his betrayal, and the extent to which Persian victory depended on his information. Some scholars argue that Persian forces would have eventually discovered alternative routes regardless of Ephialtes' intervention, while others maintain that his betrayal was decisive in determining both the battle's outcome and its timing. The broader question of alternative historical scenarios, what might have happened if Thermopylae had been held longer or if Persian victory had been less costly, has generated considerable speculation among historians and strategic analysts. While such counterfactual analysis cannot provide definitive answers, it does illuminate the battle's significance and the factors that determined its outcome. The influence of Thermopylae on subsequent military thought and practice can be traced through numerous historical examples where commanders consciously modeled their actions on the Spartan example. From Roman generals facing barbarian invasions to modern military leaders confronting superior forces, the tactical and moral lessons of Thermopylae have provided both practical guidance and inspirational examples. The battle's impact on literature, art, and popular culture has been equally profound and enduring. From ancient Greek poetry to modern novels, films, and digital media, the Thermopylae story has been continuously retold and reinterpreted according to contemporary values and artistic conventions. Each generation has found new meanings and applications for the ancient tale while preserving its essential message about courage and sacrifice. The educational legacy of Thermopylae in Western civilization has been particularly significant in shaping concepts of citizenship, duty, and moral courage. The battle has been used to teach principles of civic responsibility, the importance of military service, and the relationship between individual sacrifice and collective benefit. These lessons have influenced educational curricula from ancient Greece to modern democracies. The continuing relevance of Thermopylae in contemporary discussions of military ethics, political resistance, and moral courage demonstrates the enduring power of the ancient example. In an age of technological warfare and global politics, the fundamental human questions raised by the battle, the relationship between individual and state, the meaning of courage, the price of freedom, remain as relevant as ever. As we conclude this examination of the Battle of Thermopylae and its enduring legacy, we are reminded that history's greatest significance lies not in the detailed recounting of past events, but in the timeless lessons these events provide for understanding human nature and moral choice. The story of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans resonates across the centuries,